Hi, thanks for everyone for turning up. If anybody wants to move closer to the front, they might be a bit more intimate with Joss here, but please feel free to sit where you like. This session, entitled Building Trust with Open Standards, is going to be presented by Joss Langford. Joss is one of the most visionary and inspirational people I've had the pleasure to meet over the last few years. He's a lifelong entrepreneur and innovator. More importantly, for today's session, he's the founder of a not-for-profit organization called Coalition. And Coalition is all about building a model for capturing human behavior and human life, what makes us human, and capturing the data that builds that model of an individual. And I can't think of anything that would be more important to the future of a personal information economy, an economy based around the citizen, with the citizen in control, than having a model that defines that might well be interoperable, that allows our data to move as freely as possible in the way that we want it to. That's enough from me. I'm going to pass over to Joss. Thank you.
Are we on now? Does that sound better? Brilliant. So I'm also co-chair of one of the OASIS Standard Committee, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about that. And in addition to that, I run a wearables business in the UK, which we've run since 2008, so really early days in that industry, which is the trigger for me to come into the privacy space, and then to start looking at the identity space as well. So I'll tell you a little bit about those other businesses as we go along. So I trained as an engineer, as a data scientist and a control engineer, but pretty quickly got bored of looking at chemical sites. And I've spent the last 15 years working in the consumer products and services space. So designing products and marketing profiles for brands as diverse as Dyson vacuum cleaners and Lysol. And what you begin to realize in that space is that the thing that differentiates businesses are the businesses that understand what their customers do in that space. And those are the businesses that win in the branded consumer goods and services business. And it's also then what I end up doing within my wearables business. So this is the very old-fashioned wearable here. This is a raw data wearable, which we sell around the world to governments, helping them to understand the connection between lifestyle and disease. And so there again, my job is to try and figure out what people do all day. And actually, what's amazing is that we don't know. We really don't know what people do all day. So it's a fantastic journey, and that's driven a lot of the work around privacy. So this wearable device is a raw data device, and that means that it just stores all the data in an open format, all the measurements, and allows you to analyze them offline. And so that sort of work I have done then for all kinds of businesses, from Google through to Premiership football clubs. And so back in about 2010, I did a piece of work for West Ham, who've at last done a little bit better this year in the Premiership League. And I went there to Sam Allardyce, and I helped them understand what their players were doing for the 150 hours a week that they weren't in training. So for 18 hours a week, these players are instrumented to death. But the rest of them have got no idea what they were doing. But I'm not a real football person, so I thought, well, just send me the output. I don't need to know the names or anything. I don't need any other details at all, any metadata. I don't need that. Just give me the raw data, and I'll analyze them against the numbers. So I did that, and I went in and stood in front of them. And very quickly, we realized we needed to have the names against the people so that I could actually talk to management about the different players and when they went to bed and the sorts of things that they did. So I did one cycle of that, and 2 months later, I went in to do it again. We did the same thing. They sent me the raw data, and I analyzed it. And I knew every single player. I knew who they were because I had seen their profile before. I'd seen 1 week's worth of behavioural data linked to their name. And so the next time I saw a week's worth of data, I knew every single player out of a top team of 20 people. Every single one, no problem. So that very quickly leads you to understand that behavior, our understanding of individuals' behavior, creates digital identity. And for those of you that were privileged enough to hear John speaking earlier, my challenge within John's project around ID 2020 is how do I take that understanding about what people do every day to understand what they do over a lifetime. And how do we refine that to do life logging events? And then that allows us to be able to build identities based on people's birth certificates, their inoculations, their school attendance records, their job attendance. And as you start to build those up and then bring those together within a secure framework, then you can do some very interesting things around identity. However, you can look at it the other way. And we can say, if I've already got a digital identity, and this will be probably the case for most of you guys, if I've already got a digital identity, I can do some great things if I start to link behavioural data to it. I can build stronger identities. I can start to deliver personalised services, and that's more the space that I come from. However, as soon as I do this, I also risk intruding on privacy and impacting on trust. And so the challenge that I deal with on a day-to-day basis is how do I balance these two? How do I get the benefits and limit the downsides? And this is where we use open standards. So the open standards give us an opportunity to address issues around transparency, interoperability, and accessibility. And that's great, and they're really, really very good at that. Within the specific track that I chair within Oasis, we have a cold standard specification, and that allows us to code human behavior in a standardized way. And that's, again, a brilliant use of an open standards, and it provides an architecture then within this to give us global insight, but regional compliance. And that's the key thing for my members within Coalition. I'll tell you a little bit about that later on. However, we'll go back, and I did write this down before the keynote yesterday. Trust is an emotional response. It's a reaction to available evidence within a specific context. As engineers, we can't build something and say that it's trusted. We might say that it's trustworthy, but that's very, very different. And in fact, the best way to turn a consumer off against trust is to show them something that they don't trust and add the word trust to it. That's one of the most negative things that we can do. You can only build trust through engagement and dialogue. And I work in the commercial space very strongly about how do we do this with brands. How do we use brands as a personification of a service that consumers can relate to, that you can use to build dialogue piece by piece. And consumers don't trust this kind of abstract technical framework. So I try and avoid the term trust framework because I think there's somewhat of an oxymoron there. So really, that's the end of my talk. It's not, but this is the key thing, and I'm just going to elaborate on a couple of those points. So the story of the work that I do came from Unilever back in 2010, who came to me and a group of an internal group and asked us the question of what does a world of connected devices mean for a consumer goods business like Unilever? If I'm the brand manager for Dove, what's that going to mean? And we started trying to answer that question. So I'm having a look at the clock here. We started to try and answer that question internally with a team. And over 3 or 4 years, we used agile design processes and we built an architecture to try and answer that question. A system that could be deployed globally, that gave us regional compliance, that could be trusted by consumers, but could also measure quite personal data about them so that we could deliver them personalized services that they wanted and that they would love. And out of that program, we persuaded the Unilever board that there was a layer within the work that we had done. This is after 3 years. There was a layer within there that had the opportunity to drive interoperability around marketing, around behavior change, and also around the measurement of behavior. And that turned into the Coalition Standard. And so I wrote a book back in 2013 with a measurement scientist, an open innovation director at Unilever called Data to Life, which set forward the chart about the standard that now lives within Oasis. And over that period of 3 years, as well as the technical work, we did a huge amount of work with social scientists, behavioral psychologists, and people within the softer side of this industry space. And we said, well, fine, if we want to be able to record kind of anything that somebody does in principle, how are we going to go and do that? So we set out actually trying to do that. We started to work very detailed with individuals and with groups of people, recording what they did every day, talking to them in interviews and in different processes. What we found is scary in some ways, is that yesterday, I probably only did 100 distinct behaviors. So sitting down to watch a lecture, having a cup of tea, eating some food, going out, having a drink. If you start to add those up, for most of you, if I sat down and did a detailed questionnaire with you, you would probably recall between 30 and 60 things that you did yesterday. And if I then added in all the things that you'd forgotten to mention, like cleaning your teeth and some of the different things that you just do every day, you don't even think about it, you'd probably get up to 100. That's all. So of the 100 things I did yesterday, I'm going to do about 95 of them again today. And then when you track that through, you realize that actually to describe a lifetime, I only need about 1,000 distinct events. So this is then gets really, really interesting. So that's sort of scary, but if you think about it, most alphabets only have 20 to 30 letters in them, yet you can do enormous amounts of things with them. So when we think about how we sequence those events, the durations of those events, you can build very, very complex pictures, and you can describe an individual's life very, very accurately. And we call these within our work behavioural atoms. These are the atoms of behaviour that make up a day or a lifetime. So that's the basis of the coalition standard. And I'll say this now because I don't tend to use the word attribute. But when I'm talking about behavioural atoms, for those of you that work in the attribute space, what I'm talking about microstructured attributes. And microstructures are used very deliberately here. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the compliance and privacy benefits of structured data. Because a regulator loves a structured database because they can see everything. But we hate it in the technical space because it's a nightmare to mine for insight. And we want unstructured data. So what we do within the COAL standard is that we take any event about an individual and we code it in an identical fashion. It's in a self-describing packet. So I can run something which is as easy to search as a structured base. I can run that on a Hadoop or a Crunch-based system. And that gives us enormous insight ability. And these atoms code who the event happened to through a pseudonymous key. And this is where we link in the identity space. What they did, when they did it, where they did it, how they did it. And particularly, we can also record the consent that pertained to that event. So I can actually granularly store consent down to the individual behavior that was exhibited. There's a nice little C shape on the right-hand side here. This is one of the core pieces of IP that sits within the standard, within the open standard. This is openly available now. You can go and look at this. This is a hierarchical taxonomy of behavior. And this is a result of 4 or 5 years detailed work within that social science group to define a way of coding human behavior. So that contains over 5,000 human behaviors in a hierarchical taxonomy, which is then referenced by the Atom protocol. The specification also includes interface requirements so that we can move these data packets around the place, and also roles and responsibilities, which allows us to work within a trust ecosystem. Yeah? Okay. Yeah. So let me go around. So mood and mind, work, task, lifestyle, life stage, accident, education, trials, device, communication, travel, service, shopping, media, observer, pastime, spectator, hobby, sports, sleep, cooking, drinking, eating, symptoms, medicine, health, animal care, maintenance, housework, adult care, child care, personal care. So those are 31 top-level clusters. And then within each of those, then there are classes and subclasses and elements. And what the taxonomy tries to do is within each of those clusters is to deploy a principle called MISI, mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive, so that within each cluster, every behavior has a place and it's in its place. Sorry, I didn't say at the beginning. Please do interrupt as we go along, and we'll take questions as we go. So I've got a method now. It'll go back. I've got a method now of coding any human behavior. So where are these behaviors? Where am I going to be able to measure them? And so I do quite a lot of work with the Internet of Things space, and I don't tend to use the phrase, and I start talking about the world of connected things because that was the question I was asked back in 2010. And if you look at this space, a third nominally of that space of the IoT space is dominated by machine to machine, which is great. You can enormous productivity savings by connecting devices in that space. A third of that space is infrastructure that interacts with people. So as soon as you've got a piece of kit which is going to interact with a person, you've got both the opportunity and the risk of creating personal data from that interaction. Then a third of that is then what I call about the internet of belongings. So if I have a belonging, there's absolutely no doubt that that's returning personal data about me. And then it becomes even more intimate in wearables, and then deeper if you want to go that space. And I talk about wearables because that's the space. So if you look at the IoT space, normally 2/3 of it has the ability to return digitally coded data which pertains to an individual. Now, we can use that to great benefit, but we also have a huge privacy responsibility when we start to do that. So Coalition is the non-profit organization that Giles mentioned that I run with with Unilever. It's an independent organisation. They have supported it, and that organisation is heavily supported by Fujitsu now as well. It's a non-profit, and we aim to help organisations use personal services to deliver, use personal data to deliver services responsibly. So we are very, very commercially focused in what we do. We have a global focus. We don't hold data. We have a strong consumer face, which makes us quite different to the standards organisation. So we have this OASIS standard, and next to it, we have this non-profit. We support responsibility. And we've also realized that one of the things that is very important for us to do in this space is to support small businesses, SME. Is that a European small, medium enterprise, medium-sized enterprise? So small and medium-sized businesses have a huge block about getting into this space at the moment. The kind of the technology you need, the privacy advice that you need to be able to work in this space, particularly in Europe, is hugely burdensome for businesses. And there's actually a huge amount of innovation available to us that we can unleash if we can help small businesses work in this space responsibly. And what we're trying to do is making the right thing to do the easiest thing to do. So that's how we position ourselves. And though we are industry funded, we use our non-profit status to offset that so that we have a credible position with the consumer base. The sorts of things that we do, we support the standard development program. Sorry, I stopped. I haven't. This COEL, by the way, it stands for Classification of Everyday Living. And that's that taxonomy base. I should have said that earlier. But that's why that's there, and that's why you've got both names. So we support the standards development. We share data protection advice. So we actually commission dedicated data protection advice, legal advice, which we share among our members. It's a great service. We support privacy impact assessments, regulator liaison. As a non-profit, it's really easy for me to go and talk to regulators about how our standards and how our implementation of standards are going to impact within their regions. And I've done that extensively in Europe, and I'm beginning to do that in the US now as well. We participate in research, deliver SDKs, and I've got this word trust here. So we have a mark that our members can use. In one way, I can't stand here and say that it's a trust mark. Time will tell the trust that accrues to that mark. But it's worth me standing up and saying that I want it to be trusted because it gives an indication of the commitment that we're putting behind it. We use common layered consent terms for our members, and we publish those, and they can reference those within our tools. And we do quite a lot around consumer communication. And I just wanted to share 1-minute video with you about the sort of work that we're trying to do to talk to consumers about privacy concerns, about identity, and about the data that businesses are holding about them. I think we've lost the audio on that. Can we try that again? Yeah? Nope. We'll try one more and we can come back to it.
This is me. It's the little things I do that make me who I am. The people I share my world with know me. They know what I want and what makes me happy. I trust them, and they trust me. This amazing new world of smartphones, apps, wearables, and connected things gives me lots of exciting ways to live and share my life. But I need to know that I can trust the companies who can now see many of the little things that make me, me. Organizations with the coalition mark will act responsibly with the data that makes you, you. They will be open and give you control over your information. And because you can trust them, you can share with them, so that you can live the life you want.
So that's the sort of work that we're trying to do, and I'd be interested in people's reactions to that as we move forward to questions. I'm just going to put up one more slide, and then we'll stop. So in terms of our membership, the sorts of members that we have and the reasons we have them, large businesses come to us because they want to share risk. This is a space of significant reputational risk. And by working together, they can manage some of that risk at arm's length. They can use us as a way of creating dialogue with regulators and with government and with other sectors, and they find that hugely beneficial. It's important within those large businesses to recognize that although that might be the corporate customer, the person who's actually going to implement a service using some of our tools and standards is going to be a brand manager and a brand director, and they have very different needs. They need to be able to communicate with their consumers. If you're the brand manager for Dove and you're going to run a campaign which uses personal data and you want to show you're doing that in a responsible way, there's no way that you can use some big, clunky technical framework to describe what you're doing. You're going to have to be able to do that in a very, very simple and direct way. Another group of businesses that we work closely with are those who want to extend services globally, and particularly into the EU. And that's quite relevant within the US market as well, because those standards are coded to be compliant with existing EU legislation, as well as the upcoming GDPR. And the last point, as I made earlier, is small businesses that need cost-effective access to privacy by design tools. If we're not developing these tools before small businesses need them, they do not have the knowledge and the resources to make them themselves. And certainly that's been my experience working within a wearables business. It's a small business that we turn over low millions of dollars. We would never have been able to do what we can do in terms of privacy if it hadn't been for our ability to use this standard. So I'm going to stop there because we've still got plenty of time for some questions. Hiya.
So I took a quick look at the specs
Mm.
a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I think what I saw there was a classification system.
Yeah.
Is the part about, and we talked yesterday a little bit about the agreement of how to essentially constrain what you're collecting and so on, and the consent mechanisms. Is that part in the coalition and not in the OASIS part, or how is it split up? And where would I find that part around the agreements and the consent help in that framework?
Yeah. So there is an ongoing consent program that we're developing within Coalition to develop that layered consent model, and that's a project that's going on. We've got the basics of that there, but that's being more detailed. That we're very careful within the standard not to try and get in the way of the commercial implementation, because that's not the role of the standard. And so what happens is the legal agreement within the standard, within the roles and responsibilities, it sets out the things that you must do, but it's designed to be minimal in that. And then outside of that and next to that, then there are some legals. And so that's why actually using the non-profit organisation in the standard together gives an opportunity to inform some of the commercial arrangements around how do you implement a particular instance of the standard. And so it sits between the two of them. So for example, within the wearables, one of the things that we use the coalition standard to do very clearly, you saw the taxonomy there, is that I actually throttle data from this device. This is a wearable. So this is a raw data device, and this will tell me absolutely anything if I bother to do the data analysis. We have great algorithms for detecting things like toothbrushing if you want to get to that. This is more of a practitioner device. So this is research, this is a practitioner device. And actually what using the coalition standard allows me to do is to say the output from this device will only be in these specific areas, and I can link that to purpose. And I find that's a great way of developing trust. So for a clinician, say here's a product, it will only measure these things about you. It will not record location. And that ability to define that very tightly, and that comes from the standard, but it's backed up by the contract which comes around that. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Joss, I've got a question. Don't want to get in the way of anyone else, but you may not be able to answer it because it may be commercially sensitive, but having the model and the analysis it enables you to do on human behavior, and clearly for any consumer-facing business, I imagine that's a really interesting insight. But have you got any examples of where any of these businesses that have been using this kind of model have actually been able to make a difference to their business? Some insights that have been commercially useful for them, or?
So there's a commercial sensitive piece of that, and so I think so the original IP came from Unilever, and it's a small portion of the IP that we split out, and that was that enabling layer about how do I get all these devices and all these information systems to be able to talk to each other. What remains there is if you want to be really scary about it, is profiling capability. It's the ability to segment a marketplace. So traditionally within the consumer product space, you will segment on demographic indicators. Actually, and that's a really poor proxy for understanding insight transfer across those groups. What's much, much more interesting is to be able to segment a marketplace based on a behavioural profile. And this is why the privacy is so important, because this is inherently scary kind of stuff. But if you get it right and you deliver those services sensitively, you can personalise services very, very nicely to people like you benefited from this service. And if I'm working in healthcare with a wearables business, we use exactly the same thing to be able to understand the types of behaviour change interventions that are going to work for a particular group. So if if we are trying to fix things around obesity, diabetes, heart disease, lung disease, the 4 diseases that are going to kill most people at this conference, if we are trying to, seriously, and of those 4 diseases, the most important common factor is lifestyle. Yeah. So if I want to be able to improve people's quality of life, reduce the burden on healthcare systems around the world, I need to be able to measure lifestyle, and then I need to be able to take action from it. And the key thing there is behavior change. And trying to deploy behavior change blandly and broadly across a market or across a population doesn't work, and we know this within our governments. If I can take some profile of behavior and understand the sort of behavior change that will work within particular sectors, we can see we get a massive difference of uptake. It goes from, most behavior change studies will come out at basically a null result. On average, they don't work. But what happens is that in some populations they work brilliantly, some they're actually negative, and across 60% of the space they don't do very much at all. So targeting behaviour change gives a massive, massive benefit. I think in the UK, in the NHS, 10% increase in activity across the population is targeted to save the NHS, so just the England and Wales, £30 billion a year. And that's what we're beginning to access by using these sorts of technologies and approaches.
Fantastic. I think we're just about at the end of time. Oh, yep.
In your data analysis, did you encounter instances where a person's behavior changed dramatically between the 2 data points? For instance, I was in Texas, my wife and 2 children. This week's behavior very different.
Absolutely. And so one of the ways of looking at that is around sort of the geofencing kind of stuff. So I can look at that across time. One of the things that's very similar across people's lifestyles is their weekdays, their weekend days, and then their type of work day. So you can typically define for people 4 or 5 types of days that they have. You know, conference days, work days, home days, sports days if they do, you know, whether that's participating or watching. So there are 5 or 6 kind of profiles per day that you see. And what you'll see is that then they have a cycle. There's a weekly cycle associated with those, then there's an annual cycle associated with those. And if you start to balance that out, you know that at certain times of year, it's just the same as your credit card, you know at certain times of year people are on vacation, they're more likely to be spending money in the wrong kind of place. So you do see dramatic sort of changes, but the underlying biology is the same. So your circadian rhythm is going to respond the same wherever you are in those different places, and I can actually track your lag as you go in terms of your alertness and when your bedtimes and your wake times and your eating times are, so you can match across quite well.
When you were going over the behavior atoms, were there any of those, or let's see, where people were reluctant to share that information more than others? Okay, I'll give you my fitness information, but I'm not going to tell you my drinking habits.
That's right, and you do see that quite strongly. One of the things, it depends a lot about your measurement mechanism. With an objective measurement with wearables, we find that we get much more data than you do if I'm subjective, or if I'm asking you the questions about how much exercise you do. I get a different set of answers, and you get a different set of permissions about that. And it's exactly because of that sensitivity that we allow for this very context-based consenting to say, look, if you need my drinking behavior because I'm doing a diet, that's fine, you can have it for my diet, but there's no way that you're going to use it to judge my insurance premiums. Yeah? So there are sensitivities, and it does vary dramatically, both in context and socially and with individuals. Yeah?
Is it possible with this device to be doing at-home healthcare?
Yes, it is.
I have a friend who works with people who've had strokes, and the NHS can't afford to keep them in hospital, so they send people out who aren't quite ready yet.
Yeah.
And ideally what you'd want to have is some biometric monitoring at home on a network that could alert.
Yeah. Sorry, I've got a microphone on. So the question was, can you use these kind of technologies, either wearables and the coding scheme behind it, to help in healthcare situations where patients are being sent home, either because of the cost constraints or because they want to be at home? And the answer is yes. The immediate jumping point is to look at real time, because I want to anticipate what people are doing. I want to know what people are doing, and falls detection is a really, really strong area in this. It turns out, interestingly, that falls detection is really difficult to do technically, and you're much better off to use this to do a false detection is difficult, you're much better to do prediction. And that's where the real power comes, is not just working real time, but to anticipate and to develop a hypothesis within your system about what this person should be doing. Then you can look for a deviation against that. Stroke care, so the question was particularly around stroke as well. So stroke's really interesting from the wearables perspective, because within stroke rehabilitation, one of the things people talk about is fine finger control. But fine finger control is useless if you can't, what's called pronate and supinate, if you can't twist your wrist. And it turns out that's something really easy to measure. And if someone is recovering from stroke, what I'm looking for as a bulk measure over their day is I'm looking for them to increase their amount of twisting behaviors. And I want to see that increase day after day after day alongside the physio and the other work that they're doing. Now, what I can do is if I see that measure dropping off, then I can actually put some preemptive care in to identify people who are going to need more care. And it means I can deploy my nursing resources much more intelligently based on need rather than based on a pre-planned protocol. Does that answer the question?
Joss, thank you very much. I think we're just about out of time. We need to get ready for the next session. Thanks for the insight. You know, I'm passionate about this model. I think we're only in the very early days. It's going to change the way we understand human behavior and our customers, and therefore how we can deliver better services. And, you know, I think this model is going to be a fundamental part of that. So thank you very much.
Thank you.